Good evening, everyone, and welcome back to Bible Basics. And I'm Pastor Steve, and I'm your host. Please say hi in the comments if you feel comfortable doing that. I'm coming to you from beautiful downtown Hagerstown, and you can let us know where you're coming to us from. Tonight, we're going to be talking about the wisdom of Solomon from First Kings chapter 3. And I tell you, so last week I was in Appalachia with the Appalachia Service Project, and I missed a week of this class, but it feels like it's been much longer. Appalachia's so different, and it's not geographically far away, but it feels like I've been on a different planet, a planet I love, but a different planet. Good evening, Stella. Good evening, Cindy. Good to have you with us tonight. So each week we're doing a new story in the Bible. I'm retelling it in sort of a modern language. It's not a paraphrasing, it's a retelling. And each week we're going to be talking about what that story means to us, what it says about God, what it says about ourselves, and what it says about our relationship with God and with each other. And if you'd like to receive the story in advance each week, I send it out on Tuesday evenings on email. And you can just email the email address that you see on your screen, and I will add you to that distribution list. If you have any questions about the text or things you want to be sure that I talk about, you can send that to me in a response to the email, or you can put the questions in the chat to the side. And let me see what we've got over. Oh, it's not telling me how many people we've got tonight. Usually it does. And I'm wondering if I did something to mess that up. Good evening, John. Good to have you here tonight. Where is my head count? Don't see a head count. Oh well, I'll show you guys who's here so far. I don't have the head count. That's so frustrating. Usually I know exactly how many people are watching. Well, I shouldn't say exactly. Usually I know roughly how many people are watching. They've made some new features on the studio here, so maybe I just don't know how to use it all yet. Anyway, let's go ahead and get started with the word of prayer, shall we? Shall we? Gracious God, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of all of our hearts be acceptable in your sight, for you alone are our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. All right, so let's dig into chapter 3, shall we? The wisdom of Solomon. Solomon has become, previously on the Bible, Solomon has become king of Israel. Solomon made a treaty with Egypt, and he married the Pharaoh's daughter. They lived in Old Jerusalem until the palace, the temple, and the new walls were completed. Solomon loved the Lord and followed in David's footsteps, with one exception. Since there was no temple yet, he offered some of his sacrifices at the old hilltop shrines. The most important shrine was at Gibeon, and he went there to make 1,000 sacrifices on the altar. While he was at Gibeon, the Lord came to him in a dream and said, "Ask for whatever you want, and I will give it to you." Solomon said, "My father was a good man. He followed you faithfully, and you were always good to him. Now you've made me the king, but I'm still young, and I don't know what I'm doing. How can I rule your chosen people? Please give me the wisdom to know right from wrong. How else can I do this?" This request pleased the Lord, and he said, "You could have asked me for anything: wealth, longevity, or revenge against your enemies. But instead, you asked me for the wisdom to understand justice, so I give it to you. You will be the wisest man in history. No one else will ever be as wise as you. But I will also give you what you didn't ask for: wealth and power. There will be no other king like you. And if you follow me, like your father did, I will give you longevity as well." When Solomon awoke from his dream, he went to Jerusalem. He offered sacrifices at the Ark of the Covenant and held a feast for his servants. One day, 2 prostitutes came to the king seeking justice. One of them said, "My lord, the two of us live together. We both gave birth to babies just a few days apart, but she accidentally smothered her baby in her sleep. When she saw what she had done, she switched our babies while I was still asleep. When I woke up in the morning, I saw that the baby with me was dead, but when the sun came up, I could see that it wasn't my baby. There were no witnesses. No one else was in the house. The other woman said, "She's lying. The baby is mine. Hers is dead." And the two of them argued. The, the king asked for his sword, and it was handed to him. And he said, "I will cut the baby in two and give half of it to each of you." One woman said, "Fine. If I can't have it, no one can." The other woman said, "No, she can have him. Just don't kill him." And Solomon replied, "You are the real mother. I won't kill him. He's yours." Well, the story spread throughout Israel. Everyone was in awe of Solomon because he had the wisdom of God and ruled with justice. I see now there was a typo here. I wrote, "You, the real mother." No, you are the real mother. I apologize. I remember my mom telling me this story when I was too young to hear a story about a baby being cut in two by a sword, I have to say. But really, I mean, a lot of the Bible stories that are critical Bible stories aren't what we would today call age appropriate, but maybe more so than Grimm's fairy tales. Charles has joined us, and so has Roseanne. Good to have you folks here with us tonight. So, reflections. Solomon's story is going to continue on through chapter 11. I'm not sure how much of it we're going to cover. And the reason is because although there's a lot of wordage devoted to it, it's a very simple story with only a few points. This is the story in a nutshell. Solomon's going to build the temple, and he's going to move the Ark of the Covenant into the temple. He's going to build a palace next to the temple. The palace will be twice as big as the temple, which sends a message. Solomon is going to get really rich and powerful. Israel itself is going to get really rich and powerful, and Solomon is going to become an international celebrity. That's the story in a nutshell. Hey. Oh, Mike and Kim are here. Good to have you. The Vargos were here in church with us on Sunday. They were on their way to St. Louis from Southern Maryland. It was good to have them stop by. They got to meet some of the folks that they've only met in the chat section here, so that was really nice. They said they were going to join us tonight, but I could certainly understand why they might be a little busy being on the road and in St. Louis and everything. I think they're in St. Louis now. Anyway, so that is the story of Solomon as it is going to play out. What does this story tell us about God? Well, the idea that God rewards faithfulness with material success, it's really well established in the Old Testament. I was at the Financial Leadership Academy a few weeks ago, and they were talking about the prosperity gospel, the notion that God rewards faithfulness with wealth, and they pointed out that this is present in the Old Testament. They said, but it's not the gospel, and by that, he said, by that I mean it's not in the New Testament at all. It's completely absent from the New Testament. In the gospel, faithfulness is typically rewarded actually with sacrifice and sometimes, in fact, suffering. And on the other side, the Gospels very clearly say that riches are a hazard to the people who have them. Now, there is some of that hazard element in the Old Testament too, but it's an undercurrent. It's not the prevailing current. There's a second voice that's challenging the primary voice, and some people would say that this story of Solomon actually has some of that undercurrent in it. Mainly because of the things that I just said in the story. So the story on the one hand, it presents Solomon as being very wise, very successful, very wealthy. At the same time, it points out that the it does it through measurements. It shows that the footprint of the palace is twice the size of the footprint of the temple, and that they're right next to each other. That sends a very clear message. And I think the writer is trying to send a clear message there, coupled with the fact that although Solomon was wise, um, he didn't pass any of that wisdom on to his son, who took over for him when he died. So he was better. He used his wisdom to accumulate wealth, both for himself and for the nation. He was better at enjoying that wealth than he was at using it for God's purposes. What he built did not last. And then, Solomon's son was a fool, made an arrogant decision that blew up the kingdom. What does this story tell us about ourselves? There's actually two stories here. The first story is Solomon getting his wisdom. Then the next story is the first instance of Solomon applying his wisdom. And I would say that both stories tell us that it's good to be selfless. I am not one to claim that doing the right thing will always get you ahead. You know that. It's not going to always get you, especially in the short term. Doing the right thing can often hamper you in the short term, because the right way to do things is never the easy. It's not typically the easy way to do things. If it was, people would always do the right thing. The wrong way to do things is usually easier. That's why I hate apologies that basically amount to, look, I'm sorry I did that, but it was just much easier that way. Yeah, sure. It always is. I'm also not going to say that being selfish is always going to come back to bite you. It certainly doesn't generally in the short run. Sometimes it does in the long run. But it might. Ecclesiastes is another book in the Bible. It's one of the two books that are what we call wisdom literature. Proverbs is one, and the other one is Ecclesiastes. And the traditional story doesn't actually say this, but the traditional interpretation is that Solomon collected the Proverbs from around the world, wrote some of them himself, passed them on to the nation, and then later in life, reflecting on his life, he wrote Ecclesiastes. Ecclesiastes doesn't really say who wrote it, but it sort of fits. And if it is really about Solomon's life, looking back on it, Solomon points out that looking back on his life, the things that he did that he thought were the important things at the time, in retrospect, were not the most important things that he did. When he looked back at his life, he didn't treasure the memories of being wealthy and powerful and having built great things. He treasured the good times that he had with his family and his friends. He treasured the meals. He treasured the memories. So, if you're selfish, you may not have to pay the piper in this life, but if you live long enough, you will look back at it and say, I wish I hadn't done that. What does this story tell us about our relationship with God and with each other? Oh, when we pray to God, we should be very careful what we ask for. When you pray, what do you ask God for? You don't have to tell me now in the chat or anything, but ask yourself, when you pray, what do you ask for? Now, I used to pray, I would say in retrospect, very selfishly, because a lot of my prayers were fueled by anxiety over performing well in my various roles, meeting expectations of myself and for others. So I pray to be a better father, better pastor, better husband, better son, better brother. I'd pray for skills. And that's what Solomon did, right? But is that selfish? Well, if this was all Solomon ever prayed for, then I'd think, yeah, perhaps it is. Now, you could argue that Solomon is asking for wisdom because he wants to be a better king and do a better job for the people of God. Well, my prayers were about that too. I wanted to do a better job for other people. But I never prayed, I shouldn't say never. I didn't pray often enough for those other people. And I'm wondering how often Solomon prayed for the people on behalf of the people. I mean, if he was wise, I suppose he did. Maybe he didn't write it down or tell people about it, but what do we ask for? Now, the corollary to that, so we're not just asking, okay, what does this mean for our relationship with God? What does it mean for our relationship with others? When we talk to others, what questions do we ask? What stories do we share? And I'm a notorious storyteller, and I think I've gotten better at only sharing stories that I think will entertain the other person as much as they entertain me. I'm hoping I do a better job of only sharing stories that actually serve a purpose in the conversation, but I certainly haven't always. Too much of our conversation is sharing the story that we want to share or waiting our turn so we can share the story we want to tell, not asking questions. Blue Scally, why, thank you, sir. I appreciate that. This is one of the few shirts that I have Hawaiian shirts that I did not purchase myself at Walmart. This is a higher quality shirt. I believe it was given to me by Tim Wheatley while I was still serving at Walkersville. I think I actually remember who gave me this shirt. Tim Wheatley. That's the son. Jim Wheatley. I wish their names didn't rhyme. Cindy, it strikes me as unusual that in that time and culture, a case of any kind involving a dispute between two women would have been brought before the king. Just thinking. Yeah, that's an interesting question. And I don't think it would have been unless it had flummoxed the first people who saw it. I mean, certainly the king did have a role in settling disputes. Yes, many of those disputes, if not most, were delegated. But also, I don't know this. Okay, I know that in many traditions, the king set aside a certain percentage of time to hear the pleas of the common people on a regular basis. Things I have watched on television that were written by people who had kind of done their research generally show that there are times when the common person can make an appeal to the king. Now, was that available to everybody? Of course not. It would have been available to people living in or around Jerusalem. Or I don't know, maybe if somebody made the trek all the way in from one of the northern tribes and said, hey, I walked for a week to get here. Could I see the king and ask him this question? Maybe they would have. I don't know. It was certainly a much lower population than than what we're used to. I mean, I don't know how many people were living in Jerusalem at the time, but if it was more than what we have in Hagerstown now, I'd be shocked. The numbers that are in the Bible are generally round numbers that were used for symbolic reasons, not meant to be interpreted as accurate numbers. So I think I'm going to say it's possible that in fact could have happened. I mean, these are the very early days of the kingdom. I don't know. It's a good question, though. It's a very good question. So anyway, when we talk to God, talk about other people. When we talk to other people, talk to them about them. Pay God some compliments. Pay other people some compliments. I need to pay God more compliments in my prayer time. And of course, it's always good to use that prayer time for a time of thanksgiving. It's very good for both your prayer life and for your mental health. Very strong correlation between gratitude and peace of mind. So, as I said, I was in Appalachia last week, Wise County. We had four. How many teams do we have? We had four work teams. One was made up with people from Brook Hill, and the other three were made Brook Hill United Methodist Church in Frederick, and the other three teams were made up of people from Otterbein United Methodist Church, Grace United Methodist Church, and we had a few Catholics from Baltimore thrown into the mix. And that was a lot of fun. That was a surprise. The school that the kids went to in Baltimore went to ASP, but the family was going to be on vacation that week. So the mom called ASP and said, "Hey, I want to do a trip, but we can't go with our school. Is there any church nearby that's going this particular week?" And they said, "Well, I don't know. I don't know if Otterbein's close enough to you, but they're going that week." So they called us and we said, "Yeah, sure, you can come with us." So we had three churches combined, mixed up with the three work sites, and we worked on houses, doing a lot of flooring, doing a lot of repair from water damage, various other things. We're in the heart of Central Appalachia, very poor community. People living in many places, a truly third world lifestyle, things that most Americans don't know that conditions like this exist. And it can be difficult to experience. The first time people go, they have a hard time with it. When I come back, I'm fine when I go now because I've done it many times. But it's weird when you come back, though. It's weird when you come back and you see how good you have it, and you think, "Wow, what was I complaining about a month ago? It seems so stupid now." Now, that is one of the benefits of going on a mission trip. It helps you appreciate what you have more. But that shouldn't be the primary motivator. The primary motivator should be to express love for God and love for other people and to establish relationships with other people, to serve our neighbors, to serve our God. And that's just, it's good for the kingdom. That's the main reason to go. So, yes, it is fulfilling. But if it wasn't fulfilling, it would still be a moral obligation, I guess is my point. All right, so some of you may have read books by Robert Schnase, I think is how it's pronounced. Maybe you haven't. I have. The one he wrote that was the most influential was The Five Practices of Fruitful Congregations, I think is what it was called. It was sort of his own take on the purpose-driven church. It was a good book. When I talk about the functions of churches, I combine language from his book with language from Rick Warren and some of my own language as well. He has decided to retire early. He's a bishop in the Methodist Church in Texas, and he's decided to retire. I mean, he's at retirement age, but he was not planning to retire. He did because we have too many bishops. And they were hoping some bishops, there were some places where bishops needed to be elected, where there were vacancies, and there were places where there were too many bishops. Now the denomination is downsizing. So the hope was that some of the surplus would transfer, but nobody wanted to transfer. So to help sort of make the numbers work, he decided he would volunteer to retire early. He's been a good bishop, I believe, from what I've heard. Definitely a good writer, good thinker for the Methodist movement, and I know he's going to continue to write and continue to lead. Now, while I was gone, I got an email from one of the Methodist groups that I belong to, informing me that one of our bishops in Africa had survived an assassination attempt, which blew my mind. Happened on Sunday morning, June 30th, or whatever that Sunday was, the last Sunday in June. And I looked it up, and I have to say that I'm not comfortable calling it an assassination attempt. That would imply that there was a plot, that there was intent, that somebody sent in a hitman or something, and that is not at all what happened. What happened is that Bishop Choir of Liberia was visiting a church that was debating moving out of the denomination, and he urged them not to. And basically, there was a riot at the church, and he fled the scene. And there are photos of him leading the scene, and people sort of holding back the crowd while he got into the SUV to get out of there. So it was really, it was not an assassination attempt. It was a very scary situation in which he certainly could have been hurt, or I don't know that I want to say he could have been killed. Maybe he could have been killed. I'd like to say that would not have happened. The thing I want to share, though, is that by the best accounts, the majority of the congregation did not participate in that riot. And in fact, this past Sunday, the people who had not participated, which was most of them, got up and walked out of the church in protest over how the bishop had been treated there the previous week. So it was a bad story with a silver lining. And the last piece of religious news I want to share with you tonight. I had no idea that DoorDash partners with nonprofits around the country to do some of the food and meal deliveries that various organizations do. And it's different organizations, I think, in each city. I don't know that they have national partners; they have local partners. But so I found this out because DoorDash, the charity wing is called Project Dash. Last week they delivered their 100 millionth meal. They've delivered 100 million, and this is the charity portion of it. They've delivered 100 million free meals in addition to their for-profit work. That to me is just spectacular. I had no idea they were doing that, and I thought they needed some kudos. I've never used DoorDash. I don't think. I'm sure my kids have. Anyway, in the coming weeks, we will have at least one more week talking about Solomon. I don't know if we'll do 2 weeks or not. So next week, let me check the calendar real quick. I believe next week we will have class. Go to the month view here. We will have class next week. Well, the 23rd, I will be on vacation. And the 30th, I will be back. The week of the 23rd, we will be staying in New Jersey and visiting places in New Jersey and New York and having all kinds of fun. My son, Nicholas, a man after my own heart, I got to tell you, he has 2 priorities for the vacation. One is that when we're visiting Philadelphia, he has to try the cheesesteak that is rated the #1 cheesesteak in Philadelphia by most critics, and it's not one of the 2 famous ones that are always vying with each other over who has the best and which one was there first. It's a different one that I'd never heard of. So we've got to go there to get cheesesteaks, and the other thing is we have to get a good slice of pizza while we're in New York. Yeah, I don't think I've ever eaten New York pizza in New York, and of course, there's a lot of disagreement over where the best slice of pizza is. Anyway, that's not next week. That's 2 weeks from now. I don't know why I shared all that. Anyway, thank you to everybody who supported Appalachia Service Project. I know Holly doesn't watch these, but thanks to my daughter for organizing the trip. The last portion of it, right before we left, was getting a little hairy, and she said, "I'm never doing this again. This has ruined something that I loved." But by the end of the week, she was saying, "If I have the right support, I think I can do it again." And she didn't mean to say that she didn't have the right support. She had all the support that she asked for. I think she's just decided that there are elements of the organization that perhaps would be better suited to somebody else. But she did a great job, and in particular, I think she did a good job of getting support from the congregation and the other congregations that participated. And it was great working with other Methodist churches, especially that we're going to be cooperating more in the future going forward. Well, that's all I've got for you tonight, folks. Let's go ahead and close out with a word of prayer, shall we? Gracious God, give me the grace to accept with serenity the things that cannot be changed, the courage to change the things which should be changed, and the wisdom to distinguish the one from the other, living one day at a time, enjoying one moment at a time, accepting hardship as a pathway to peace, taking, as Jesus did, this sinful world as it is, not as I would have it, trusting that you will make all things right if I surrender to your will. so that I may be reasonably happy in this life and supremely happy with you forever in the next. While I was praying, I decided I wanted to give a shout out to Cindy Brown, who joined us tonight, despite the fact that she probably would like to already be in bed because it's day 2 of the second week of Otter Camps. And she's got to be running out of gas sometime in the near future. Thank you for joining us tonight, Cindy. Thank you all for being here. Wish you all a good evening. I'll see you either in church or online. Until then,